Chair now recognizes Mr. Sablon for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I apologize to my colleagues whose I caught into first. But Secretary Haaland, good morning and welcome. Welcome back to the House. It continues to be your house also, so as a former member. I want to commend the administration's recognition of important insular area programs administered by your department under the Office of Insular Affairs and the 25 budget request. I think I have a second bite at this part of your budget because there's another one coming up next week in the subcommittee. So the budget would increase by $1 million. The TAP money that supports the Marianas, this, as you very well know, are very important to the communities and getting funding for programs normally, not in normal situations or normal programs. So thank you for that. Your budget continues investment in the Energizing Insular Communities programs, which helps the insular areas reduce their reliance on expenditures on imported fuel. I think we could work more on this, but thank you for that also. It also requests a modest increase, but an increase nonetheless for the brown tree snake program and the coral reef initiatives. The CIP money, Madam Secretary, has received an increase. It's been fixed at $27.7 million since its inception 40 years ago. Even though the infrastructure needs of the islands continue to expand, it was by law designed for the Northern Marianas exclusively, and then that changed, so it's now shared with the other territories. So I hope appropriators will agree to this. Madam Secretary, I do want to bring one thing to your attention. It was a remarkable accomplishment for us, for the United States and the freely associated states, to renew the compacts of free associations for another 20 years. The new agreements provide a meaningful funding increase, which will no doubt benefit for our national security interests as well as the future prosperity and well-being of the COFA nations and the people of the Marshall Islands, Palau, and Federated States of Micronesia. And I commend the administration. I again commend for enlisting Ambassador Joseph Yoon as special envoy to serve as the President's envoy for compact negotiations. His seasoned diplomacy and commitment to fairness and respect proved instrumental in renewing the compact. That was a really good decision. But with the increase in funding, there's the obvious need for OIA to be equipped with the resources to exercise effective oversight in the management of the fund. So are you able to assure us that that OIA will continue to do all of this task with the funds you request? Yes? I think yes, right? No?
Thank you so much. And thank you for recognizing the hard work of everyone who worked long hours and a very long time on the COFA package. I want to just assure you that our implementation is underway and is required by the new law. We're working to appoint DOI's representatives to the Interagency Group for Freely Associated States and require DOI members for the Compact Economic Management and Trust Fund committees. So it is all underway. We worked hard to get it done, and we'll make sure that it gets done in the right way. Thank you.
Mr. Sablon, do you have your microphone on?
Okay, so I lost 30 seconds? No, I will have another bite at OIS budget. So I have 30 seconds to Mr. Hoffman. I yield 30 seconds if he wishes.
I thank the gentleman. It's not quite enough time to ask the question that I wanted to ask the Secretary, so I will thank you and defer.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Nice seeing you again. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields back.
Thank
The
you.
chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Secretary. It's good to have you back. I remember when we served together on this committee, so welcome. The National Park Service is a great asset to our nation. In 2023, NPS recorded 325 million visits at more than 400 federal sites. With the fact that these parks are the jewels of America, and I've been to over 300 of them myself, I must continue to ask about the quality of guest visits. Many of our concessionaires stand ready and waiting to take up the slack. Our concessionaires are constantly judged, however, on some unknown and ambiguous criteria. And while the Commercial Visitor Services Concession Contracts Rule went into effect earlier this year, I still find some concern at the amount of transparency. Will you commit to a more transparent process for the concessionaire contracting process?
Thank you so much for the question. And of course, we always love to be more transparent. I'll take a look at this when I get back to the office and see how that is going forward. But we rely on our concessionaires.
Very good. Thank you. Has NPS considered looking to the concession industry to support immediate capital investment needs?
I couldn't answer that, but I would get with Chuck Sams and find out and make sure we got back with your office.
Okay, thank you. Because I would like to explore how NPS can allow for increased capital investment from willing concession industry members under existing contracts to improve the park guest experiences. So I think with some creativity, flexibility, and willingness to work together, we could make some really good gains there.
I appreciate that.
Now, changing subjects, since the Biden administration took office, 3.5 million acres of working federal lands have been locked up through antiquities designations, resource management plans, with mineral withdrawals, etc. The most egregious land lockup is the administration's Land Conservation and Health Rule, which will allow so-called mitigation and restoration leases to lock up tens of thousands of acres per lease across the country. Now, your agency states that the authority to implement this rule comes from 43 CFR Part 2920. However, Section 2920.1 clearly states that the only authorized uses for leases under this section are for residential, agricultural, industrial, and commercial uses. There's no mention of mitigation and restoration. Do you really think that this rule will stand up to legal challenge in court?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And I do want to say that with this rule, we engaged in a robust and transparent public process. Many people had opportunities to weigh in, including our hunters, anglers, outdoor recreation enthusiasts. This rule will not inhibit any current grazing leases or anything like that. And I want you to know that everybody thought about so many of these things when they were working through the rule, and I feel confident that we have done it in the right way.
Well, it's my belief, though, that whether or not it breaks existing leases, it expands the definition of leases to unintended areas that Congress never authorized. And that's why we're doing a CRA on this issue like this week, and we're going to send it over to the Senate, and hopefully they can repeal this rule. In Colorado, and let me ask you about another subject. In the first 3 years under your control, the department has held one lease sale in Colorado, leasing a single 290-acre parcel, bringing in $1.2 million in revenue to state and federal governments. And it looks like BLM has one scheduled upcoming lease sale in Colorado for a mere 120 acres. This lease sale, along with the only other lease sale that I just mentioned, shows neglect of the western slope of Colorado. Will you commit to holding more lease sales on the western slope of Colorado this year?
Congressman, I do want to just say, because I haven't said it yet, that production on public lands is at an all-time high. And so we have been doing our jobs. Onshore, in the last 2 years, the BLM has sold the drilling rights to more than 230,000 acres onshore.
Excuse me for interrupting, what about in Colorado? There's only been one lease sale.
I beg your pardon. In Colorado, specifically, we are moving forward with what we are required to do, and I'm happy to get back with you on any specific areas in Colorado if that is what you would prefer.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Stansberry. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
All right. Well, good morning and welcome, Secretary Haaland. Always wonderful to have you back in the House, which is also your former House. And also welcome to Assistant Secretary Daniel Davis and Director Flanagan. It's wonderful to have such good friends here. I want to start today by focusing on the broad scope and historic nature of the work that the Department of Interior is doing right now under the leadership of our extraordinary Cabinet Secretary. We've already talked a little bit about this morning, but under your leadership, Madam Secretary, there's been historic leases for clean energy, protection of vast swaths of our public lands, and of course, a focus on climate resilience. And a lot of that was made possible because of this administration and our president and your commitment to climate change. And, this body just 2 summers ago passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is not only the largest investment in climate change in our nation's history, but of any nation ever in the history of this planet. And to watch the Department of the Interior implement the bill has been really extraordinary and impressive. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that the work that you all are doing to involve our tribal nations and around the Justice 40 initiative is especially important to make sure that our low-income and communities that have been historically excluded from those processes have a seat at the table. I also want to acknowledge the extraordinary work that the department has done on public lands. There's been a lot of political hype put forward today about the public lands rule, but of course, as you know, as a New Mexican, we implemented a similar rule at the state level through our awesome public lands leader, Ms. Garcia Richards, just a couple years ago. And not only did it not lock up our public lands, we had historic revenues, and it enabled us to protect more sacred sites and conserve lands that are environmentally sensitive. So I strongly support the Department of Interior's public lands rule, and I know it'll be an important tool to put conservation and tribal sacred sites on par with the other uses that we use our lands for. I also want to personally thank you for your leadership on Chaco Canyon. Of course, our tribes and pueblos have worked for decades, well, actually over a century, to get those lands protected, and we greatly appreciate your leadership on that. And also the Buffalo Tract set-aside that just happened a couple of weeks ago. That land is, of course, important to many of our pueblos and our communities in Sandoval County as a historic and a cultural site and a wildlife corridor. I also want to commend you on your water resources work. I think you have the best water resources team probably in history, though you've had some good ones in the past. Your Colorado River work is really important for making sure that the West does not go dry. We're working on a similar bill for the Rio Grande with our colleagues in Texas and Colorado, and we strongly ask for your support on that, as well as for the Water Data Act, which is a bipartisan bill that we're trying to get across the finish line. I also want to note that you all have a water rights settlement proposal in the budget, which would enable us to fund many of our water rights settlements. And New Mexico has probably a historic number of water rights settlements in front of Congress right now. And so one of the things I would like to ask for your support and commitment today is to help us get the Rio San Jose, Rio Jemez, Navajo Gallup, Amit Taos, soon Zuni, and soon Navajo, Arizona settlement across the finish line. That's very important for us in New Mexico. May I have your commitment that you will assist us with that?
Yes, we are working every day on those settlements, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we want to make sure that we have funding for that particular issue.
Thank you. And I know another issue that's very important and related to that is making sure that there's sufficient funding for the Pueblo Irrigation Fund. And we want to make sure that the funding makes it into the next budget for that, as well as to make sure that we have a settlement team for the Middle Rio Grande Pueblos. So those are some of the priorities for our communities, as you know very, very well. But I want to take the rest of my time to have you talk about the work you've been doing on boarding schools and the historic work you've been doing to lift up Native voices in history and really reconfigure the department and its priorities around tribal consultation and healing.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Happy to answer that. Of course, we have our second report coming out for the boarding school initiative that should be out sometime very soon. We finished our Road to Healing. There will be an oral history project between that the Smithsonian is helping us to implement. And I think the main issue that came out of all of those meetings with tribes, all of the opportunities that survivors and descendants had to speak directly with us, is that language preservation, language revitalization. Across the board, even though things were so different from tribe to tribe, it was consistently said that their native languages had been stolen from them. So we're proud that the president and Dr. Biden are very supportive of our language revitalization efforts, and will continue to make that a priority.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I'll just finish by saying every single day we are so deeply proud to have you as our secretary and as a New Mexican and as a leader. And every single day I hear from members of our tribal communities of how grateful they are for your leadership, including yesterday when a friend and colleague of mine from Washington State, who's a tribal council member, said that you're their hero and they're so grateful that you're there serving our country. So thank you for your service.
Gentleladies, time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Graves, for 5 minutes.
Madam Secretary, welcome back to the committee. I appreciate you being here today. One of the biggest things that I hear last week, I had the opportunity to be home during recess week and hearing a lot about just the unaffordability of living in America today, and specifically watching as we're seeing higher energy prices related to gasoline, related to utilities. I'm just curious, what message do you have to the American family that can't afford to make ends meet? And many of the policies that are coming out of the Department of the Interior are actually contributing to that as a result of higher gasoline and utility prices.
Thank you, Congressman. And I'll just say I missed your king cake this year, but that's all right. I had to travel all the way to your state to get one. But I will say, of course, we recognize that, and I know President Biden is working every day to lower costs for Americans. We believe that all the work we're doing on this clean energy transition will lower energy costs across the board for Americans across the country, and we feel confident about that. I know that we don't set gas prices.
Madam Secretary, I guess just this table here really concerns me in that you would have to go back to the Jimmy Carter administration to even find any time in our nation's modern history where you would have such few acres that are offered for energy production. And just to put things in perspective, during Jimmy Carter's administration, they leased 100 times more acres than during the Biden administration during the same period of time. So I feel like that this is a direct result of this administration's actions that are causing these higher unaffordable prices for American families.
Congressman, I do, first of all, want to say that it's undeniable that production of oil on public lands is at an all-time high. It truly is. There are also a lot of leases and
Madam
permits
Secretary,
that are laying fallow.
Very quickly, just because I don't want to mislead the public, how long does it take to go from a lease sale to production onshore, and how long does it take to go from a lease sale to production offshore?
Of course, that depends greatly on the industry.
But ballpark.
I would love to pass it to Laura.
All right, I tell you what, just so we don't delay too long, it takes on average maybe 4 to 5 years for onshore. The only lease sale you've had for onshore was in 2022, which means none of the production occurring right now has anything to do with this administration. For offshore, it's actually closer to about 10 years. Once again, none of the production today has anything to do with this administration. What you're doing is you're creating an energy crisis for the future, not just for right now as a result of future supply, but you're creating an energy crisis for the next administration and the one after as well by not producing. Now, we've had senior administration officials that have come and testified before this committee that have said when you stop producing, it doesn't prevent or doesn't cause a reduction in demand. All it does is it causes other countries to fill the void. And so let's take a look here. This is Iranian crude, and this shows the increase in Iranian crude because, again, voids are going to be filled. Voids will be filled. And so even though sanctions and everything else, we're actually seeing their exports increase, right? And so things like the LNG pause, the LNG ban effectively, it just creates market opportunity for other countries. And so here's Iran. I'm going to guess that you don't support the Israel-Iran war that's going on right now with the terrorists and others that are occurring. And so I guess some estimates have indicated that Iran has profited to the tune of $60 to $65 billion. That money's going to Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, and American service members have been killed. Does it concern you that U.S. energy policy is funding the Iranian war? We just came in and provided $14 billion in funds to Israel. So effectively, U.S. energy policy is funding Iran. U.S. taxpayers are funding Israel's defense. Does that concern you at all? And the death of American troops associated with this? Is that concerning?
With respect to your original question on production, as I said, it's at
I'm
an
sorry,
all-time high.
I've moved on from that one, but on the Iran issue, does that concern you at all?
Congressman, I'm concerned about everything about our country. I love this country. I'm concerned.
What
about
message
everything.
would you say to the troops' families that were killed as a result of Iranian proxies funded effectively with U.S. energy policy dollars that have been killed? What would you say to them as a result?
I would like to say to you, Congressman, that there are millions of acres of leased, non-producing federal land currently in this country, and there are thousands of approved permits to drill.
And Madam Secretary, you sat before this committee and told us that there were 9,000, only to have come back and realize that the number was grossly overestimated, and also not really understanding the process, and that doesn't necessarily mean the ability to actually produce. Once again, there was just $60 billion provided in U.S. taxpayer funds to Russia. Russia is also profiting from U.S. energy policy. We're funding both sides of the war. Bad U.S. energy policy impacts American families and funds the Russians, and then American taxpayers fund the other side of the war. I'm very concerned about what's going on. I'd strongly urge you to think about the problem you're causing for the next administration and the one after. Think about the fact that this administration's energy policies are funding both sides of the wars, and American service members have died as a result.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
Well, I hope the chairman is as indulgent with Democratic members as he was with our colleague from Louisiana.
I think Ms. Stansbury went over about
All right. Well, I appreciate that. I will just say this. I don't know that maybe my friend is confused about the particular witness that we're hearing from today. Ms. Haaland is not the Secretary of State. She's not the Secretary of Homeland Security. She's the Secretary of Interior. And in my view, she's doing an effective job. And I would also say I think the questions in particular that were posed by the gentleman from Louisiana, and perhaps he didn't mean to convey them this way, but context matters. I know that the Secretary has a bone-deep commitment to the United States. Perhaps he's unaware that her father is a veteran, was a distinguished officer in the United States Marine Corps who earned a Silver Star for his service during the Vietnam War. I find it offensive.
Is the gentleman suggesting something I said was inaccurate?
Mr. Graves, it is not your time. It is my time.
I wanted to make sure I understood.
To the extent the chairman wishes to intervene,
perhaps
he can, because I haven't yielded time to anyone. I'm addressing the Secretary, and I say to you, Madam Secretary, that we are proud of your service and your family's service to our country and grateful for the work that you are doing at the Department of Interior. notwithstanding the histrionics from, unfortunately, some of my colleagues today. I'm surprised by it, to be candid. As you know, Madam Secretary, and it's good to see you, and welcome back to the Natural Resources Committee. I'm proud to represent the 2nd Congressional District of Colorado, which includes the headwaters of the Colorado River, and to serve as co-chair of the bipartisan Colorado River Caucus. We have been grateful for the communication and the leadership of your agency as we continue to face drought conditions throughout the Colorado River Basin. I understand, of course, that the department is currently developing post-2026 operating guidelines for the Colorado River through a multi-year and collaborative stakeholder process. I think it's important that we acknowledge the need to be proactive, in our efforts to conserve this critical resource rather than the solely reactionary and crisis-driven. To that end, I'm proud that we've introduced 2 bills, one of which has passed the Natural Resources Committee and passed the House on a bipartisan basis, the Drought Preparedness Act, which would support a critical program in your department, Madam Secretary, that the Bureau of Reclamation uses, the Drought Response Program, to provide assistance through drought contingency planning, drought resiliency projects, and emergency response actions. I'm hoping the Senate will take that bill up. As you know, your budget request includes $25 million for the Drought Response Program. I wonder if you could briefly talk about how that investment will help increase drought mitigation work in the Colorado River Basin.
Thank you very much, Congressman, and I thank you for recognizing how important the drought response programs are as part of the $66 million request for water smart programs to work cooperatively with communities to address water shortages. I will just tell you that if those authorities are not reauthorized, the drought response program, it provides assistance to water managers to build long-term resiliency to drought. As you know, people have said that it's a 1,200-year drought in the West, and you recognize that every single day, as I do, being a New Mexican. And so we feel these programs are incredibly important so we can continue to do the work and make sure that communities have the water that they need.
Well, I thank you, Madam Secretary, and I certainly hope that the Senate will heed your call and our call to pass that bipartisan bill, as well as the House with respect to the second bill in reference to the authorities that you mentioned. I just want to briefly touch on SRS, the Secure Rural Schools and the Payments in Lieu of Taxes program. Of course, understanding that NRS is primarily a Forest Service SRS is primarily a Forest Service program, but there is a portion operated by the Bureau of Land Management. We've introduced legislation. It's bipartisan legislation. Representative McMorris Rogers of Washington is the co-sponsor to reauthorize the SRS program for an additional 3 years. The program is critical for rural communities across the country, including communities in my district. This program has broad bipartisan support. There are 70 co-sponsors on this particular bill, and I'm certainly grateful for that. But unfortunately, I'll just say, Madam Secretary, that we've been frustrated that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have not put this bill on the floor for a vote. The authorization lapsed, as you know, back in September of 2023. There are a lot of communities and congressional districts that will be harmed if we don't get this bill done. Just to give you it by way of example, Chairman Bentz's district received more than $51 million. Representative Fulcher, whom him and I have worked closely together for many years, his district received $16.6 million. I know, Representative LaMalfa, you care about this program, $11.4 million in your district. That we've got to get this done. I know the department is supportive of this effort. I'm just hoping that we can implore the Speaker and perhaps, Mr. Chairman, we can enlist your support in getting this done so that all of our communities in rural America aren't harmed disproportionately. I thank the chairman for his indulgence.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for appearing with us today, Madam Secretary. Welcome back. About 8 years ago, several secretaries ago, Secretary Jewell signed an agreement to remove the 4 hydroelectric dams along the Klamath River. And now we're seeing, with the partial work of that being done, devastation to that river that you, well, I won't say can't imagine, because we could imagine that. We knew there was untold amounts of silt that had gathered behind those dams over the years. Now they've been unleashed upon the whole river system all the way out to the mouth into the Pacific Ocean. And so I mentioned this to you when we saw each other. Have you had a chance to take a look at any of the video or photographs of that devastation, what it meant to the wildlife and water quality, et cetera, along there?
I'm sorry, Congressman, I didn't hear the exact question.
Have you had a chance to take a look at any of the photographs or videos or what have you of the devastation by the unleashing of that material into the river system all the way out to the mouth of the ocean?
I have not seen photographs, but if you...
Seen what? Sorry?
I have not seen any photographs, no. But I'd be happy to look at photographs.
You really should, and if you had a chance to visit in person, because what we're talking about when ostensibly this is about salmon and the life cycle of the salmon involved is 3 years, and there's people from the department and other entities claiming it'll be a 10 to 12 year project for the silt to actually disappear. At the same time, while they have equipment scooping silt out from the lake bottom and dumping it in the river. Now, if you were a miner, if you were anybody else, that would be probably life in prison for what they're doing there, yet somehow that is deemed to be okay. So what we're looking at is the dam removal project so far is a disaster. And at the same time, we hear a lot of talk about climate change and the type of replacing our vehicles, replacing the power generation with CO2 free, right? I'm sure the department has a lot of goals on CO2, right? I mean, in general, right? Carbon dioxide, goals on reducing it? Just from the hip, ma'am. I mean, we don't have to.
Sorry.
Anyway, I'll keep moving on. Everybody has goals in the California government, the U.S. government on climate change and reducing all that. So at the same time we're talking about this, we are getting rid of the source of CO2-free electricity in dams and then dewatering other dams and making it where they're ineffective at running water through their hydro plants. We've barely kept alive the Diablo Canyon power plant in Central California. At the same time, we're talking about mining and the inability to extract the metals that are needed for producing the electrified vehicles and electrified everything else. So we're going in the opposite direction of both things to meet the goals that the administration and California government seems to be placing upon people to their detriment economically, jobs, et cetera. So at what point, what do you say to the public with goals like this that are wrecking the river and making it much more expensive? And let me zero in on this part. The Klamath Lake is at 90.6% capacity as of yesterday, as the lakes around California are filling up. Shasta, Oroville, Folsom's on its way up. New Malone is as high as it's been in quite a while. Yet we're seeing 40% allocation to some of the San Joaquin Valley districts. So how does your department explain that in context with people seeing skyrocketing food prices, and then we talked about hydroelectric and electricity prices? What am I supposed to say to them about the direction that this administration and your department is going?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And I know you and I have had conversations about this, and you've also essentially had an open door to the Bureau of Reclamation staff.
Thank you. Yep.
I know they're also going to be here later in the month. So I want to tell you that, yes, we understand that there was record moisture in some parts of the West. However, it's my understanding that the drought persists. And so they are working to be
even
careful with the water that we have so that people will have it into the future.
But there's not a drought. 2 years in a row, almost record snowpack. The lakes are essentially full if they're allowed to be topped off, all except for the San Luis Reservoir, which is about 25% down. So the farmers in Klamath are still, with a nearly full lake, are going to still be at maybe 2/3 of their allocation, as well as the 40%ers down south in San Joaquin. So with all that, with all this, how do you explain it to the farmers? And then let me come back to the CO2 one more time. Again, you got CO2, climate goals. What percent of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide?
I understand that you will tell me. how much it.
No, I'd like to hear it from you. I'd like to hear it from you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Oregon. Ms. Hoyle.
0.04%.
We've heard that before.
Once or twice. Thank you very much.
The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Hoyle. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Secretary Haaland. I just want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for your work and your availability and accessibility, specifically in talking about federal lands and timber and wildfire issues. With that, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Mr. Huffman.
I thank the gentlelady from Oregon. Madam Secretary, it's great to see you, and I want to start by commending you for the composure and dignity you have maintained throughout some questioning that in many cases is just absurd. You have been lectured about American national security interests and apparently helping Iran and even Russia by a member of Congress who just last week voted against aid to Ukraine, handing Vladimir Putin an incredible gift, just as his incredible unfailing obeisance to the American oil and gas industry has helped over the years to essentially enrich and empower and create Vladimir Putin and his war machine. There is no amount of shame or hypocrisy that will stop some of my colleagues from rolling out the political theater and trying to score cheap points. But you've maintained your cool and professionalism. I think it speaks to who you are. It's got to be especially tough, though, to be lectured about tribal consultation from members of this body who, at best, are ambivalent about tribal rights, and their hypocrisy and spottiness on this can be seen just in the last 24 hours. And so I'm going to ask you a little bit about the gray wolf. Now, am I correct, Madam Secretary, that the gray wolf is a sacred spirit animal to most American tribes?
I believe that wolves for many tribes have a deep cultural meaning.
Yes, and in fact, in the past, when there's been legislative delisting of the gray wolf and states have proceeded to slaughter them in incredible numbers, Native American tribes have actually had to go to court and file lawsuits to protect this culturally significant and sacred part of their heritage. Am I correct about that?
I believe you are, Congressman, and I just want to say that all life is essentially sacred to Native Americans, and I know that they care deeply about every animal that has a right to be on our landscape.
And should Native American tribes have a voice? Should they be consulted in wildlife management decisions affecting the gray wolf?
Well, across the board, I appreciate you raising that because we have entered into 200 co-stewardship agreements with tribes across the country, not just for animals, but for landscape health as well. And we feel that their indigenous knowledge has a lot to offer us. Indigenous knowledge is science, and we can rely on that as a tool that we use to protect our lands for future generations.
And that, I would say, is as it should be. But just yesterday, to a person, every Republican member of this Natural Resources Committee on the floor voted to reinstate a Trump rule that did not involve any tribal consultation for the gray wolf. And then they went a step further and prohibited any judicial review, which kind of gives up the game. It would certainly suggest that they don't care very much about tribal consultation when it comes to the gray wolf. But more broadly, it has been suggested that because you don't agree with the Native American voices that want to do oil and gas drilling in some places, and you have listened to other indigenous voices that may oppose oil and gas drilling or may support land conservation, that somehow you're insensitive to tribal consultation. I find that offensive. It's got to be hard to listen to while keeping you cool, but you have done it. Let me just give you the remaining time that I have to speak to just what a serious value this is and priority this is to consult and lift up Native voices.
Thank you, Congressman. And of course, since President Biden has been in office, tribal consultation has been a top priority of his. As I mentioned earlier, he restarted the White House Council on Native American Affairs. Many of us have secretaries' tribal advisory committees. We want to make sure that tribes have a seat at the table. At one point, it seemed like we were doing so many consultations that the tribes were just asking us to slow down a little bit. I know that their voices are incredibly important. And there were decades and decades where tribes never were asked to have a seat at the table, where they never had opportunities to tell the federal government what their policies were doing to them and their communities. That's one of the reasons why our federal boarding school initiative has been so important to tribes across the country. I appreciate I appreciate you being with me when we went to visit with the tribes in your district. That was incredibly important, and I know it means a lot to them for you to listen.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Yield back.
Gentlemen's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Fulcher, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Madam Secretary, thanks for coming and for being back here. It's good to see you. I have had a chance to look at some of your written testimony and also heard some of your verbal testimony as well. But I haven't picked up, at least clearly, the answer to the following. And it has to do with the number of renewable energy projects that the department has approved in this administration. Do you happen to know how many of those approximately renewable energy projects that have been approved?
I feel like I know that number, but I would love for Laura to answer that question because I don't want to get it wrong, if that's okay with you.
Okay, please.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Congressman, I can tell you the megawatts approved, and it's somewhere exceeding 7,000 megawatts. We would have to get back to you on the specifics of the numbers.
Okay, so let me do a follow-up question then. How many mining projects have been approved in the approximate same window of time?
Since the president has been in office, we have we've approved 40 mining or mining modification permits, as well as 5 critical mineral mines.
So there appears, at least from my vantage point, that there's a disparity where there's a focus much more in favor of renewable energy projects and over the mines at a time where we have so many needs for critical minerals. Mr. Chairman, with that, I would like to yield some time to Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much, Representative Fulcher. Secretary Haaland, the chair, Resserman, put into the record the Voice of the Arctic Inupiat resolution, number 2024-1, meaning their first resolution of this year. And I want to say that they're called the Voice. The Voice membership is comprised of local governments, tribal service providers, and Alaska Native corporations across the North Slope of Alaska. In this resolution, it says, whereas prior to the convention, that's the Alaska Federation of Native American Convention, held October 13, 2023, the North Slope Trilateral Regional Leadership wrote Secretary Haaland a letter asking for a meeting regarding both the ANWR and NPRA announcements and lack of meaningful engagement with the region's leadership. AFN convention came and went without a response granting or denying the meeting request, and to date, no response has been received. Do you dispute that?
I do.
So are you telling us today that you specifically met with the Voice of the Inupiat on ANWR and NPRA Alaska?
I am saying that we have not ignored any voices in Alaska.
Madam Secretary, this is a yes or no question. I'm asking you specifically. Did you meet with the North Slope Alaska Natives, the Voice of the Inupiat, those groups on the North Slope? Did you specifically meet with them? That's a yes or no question.
I know. I feel like I need to explain further on how this whole issue was dealt with, because We gave opportunities for the tribes in Alaska as well as the corporations to respond to tribal consultation requests.
Madam Secretary,
it was not
with my minute and a half
to.
left, this is just a simple question. Did you specifically and individually meet with the Alaska Natives on the North Slope?
Congressman, if you would like a detailed list of everyone that we have met with, we are more than happy to get with you or your staff after this meeting. I want to say,
I don't need you to get with me. I need you to get with the Alaska Natives on the North Slope.
I understand.
Madam Secretary, I've asked you 3 times. It's a simple yes or no. Did you specifically meet with the Alaska Natives on the North Slope before you put this rule forward? That's a yes or a no.
My first trip to Alaska, I went up to Uktiagvik. I had a tribal meeting, with a tribal roundtable with the tribes all over the district, as well as a state legislator
Madam Secretary,
from the
this will be the
area.
4th time I ask you specifically, did you meet with the Alaska Natives on the North Slope? Specifically for your ANWR rule and NPRA Alaska, did you meet with them?
I can say that the BLM held 3 in-person meetings on
Mr.
the
Chair,
proposed rule.
with that, I find it difficult that the NPRA's 23 million acres is entirely located within the boundaries of the North Slope region of Alaska, and she can't answer the question whether she met with them or not. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, for the record, wanted to respond to the Secretary that my understanding is there's only been 5 mines that have been approved since in this administration. The others were related to some sort of expansion. So with that, yield back.
Does the gentleman yield?
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Mullen, for 5 minutes. Gentleman recognizes the gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, aloha. It's good to see you. I want to commend you and recognize you and your department on a number of items that I think are relevant to the hearing. First of all, I detect in the questions from the other side some fundamental misunderstandings about what tribal consultation actually consists of. Essentially government-to-government interaction with the indigenous peoples of our country that occurs on many levels, but is fundamentally an interaction and a sign of respect and inclusion of the indigenous peoples. And I know this for a fact because you have been exemplary in terms of your understanding of the Native Hawaiians, the indigenous peoples of our country whose native lands are in Hawaii, and the consultation level in the Department of the Interior over your administration has been superior, and so obviously indicates, from my perspective, a complete understanding of what consultation actually means. So that's number one. Number two, certainly I believe that you have been exemplary in terms of your understanding of the critical threats presented to many species across our country. So in your administration of our endangered species laws, half of the endangered species in our country are in Hawaii. Clearly you have focused there. Mr. Sablan has already talked about the compacts of free association, which were critical agreements for our country on a number of levels. The Department of the Interior was central to getting the COFA over the finish line. I just met with the leaders of those countries, and they are still talking about the fact that it was a critical set of understandings and agreements. Number four, you understood and your department understood the significant and severe tragedy of the Maui wildfires and was part of a government-wide response in Lahaina and Maui overall. You took a personal interest in that. I deeply appreciate that. Number five, I believe that your management of our national parks, our treasures, as was already said, has been exemplary. And your administration of the Great America Outdoors Act, which you championed as a member of Congress, where you are now administering some $500 million a year to address our national parks, has been a very significant contribution. Number 6, we are in the middle of implementing generational reinvestments in our infrastructure through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, trillions of dollars. And the Department of the Interior is personally responsible for getting out of the door and into communities tens of billions of dollars under those infrastructure laws to critical areas that I think we could all agree are essential from the perspective of our broader interests. These fall in the areas of climate resiliency, including wildfire resiliency, tribal electrification, which I think we believe is critical importance, and then legacy pollution projects where we simply have to clean up. The infrastructure dollars have been going out of your department for that. And then finally, I would note your responsibility for the territories of our country who often feel that they're not fully included, and you have embraced them both as a department and personally. And these are critical parts of our country. And so those are just 7 of the areas where I believe that the department's contributions and your contributions personally have been noted, both for our country as well as for my Hawaii. And I thank you for all of that. What I'd like to do is give you a little bit of time to comment on one area that comes out of the Maui experience, and that is wildland fire management, which is an area that you are responsible for. Could you just give us a little bit of amplification of how the budget addresses wildfire prevention, which is impacting so much of our country?
Thank you so much, Congressman. And I just want you to know that one of our staff is still detailed to Maui, working with FEMA to make sure that things are right for the Native Hawaiian communities there. Of the $7.1 million, about $3.4 million is for NAGPRA grants. Let's see. This funding will support the Native Hawaiian community by providing grants to Native Hawaiian organizations as well as to museums. The remaining $3.7 million in funding will be used to assist interiors, bureaus, and offices with prioritizing and expediting repatriations. That is not what you asked me. I apologize, Congressman. The bill funding in 2023, DOI completed more than 2.5 million acres of priority wildfire risk reduction using annual appropriations in bill funding. With the bill funding, 71% of the acres interior treated were in the wildland urban interface, protecting places where people live on or adjacent to federal lands. And I think that is some of the areas that you spoke about.
Thank you very much. And I also thank you on NAGPRA. That's really critical as well.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this legal analysis from the University of Colorado Law School and the University of Utah College of Law that details the statutory authority of BLM to update their multiple use mandate to incorporate conservation as a use on par with other traditional uses. The analysis states that based on the plain language of the Federal Lands Policy Management Act, the public lands rule represents a sound interpretation of the mandates provided to Congress by BLM.
Unanimous consent has been granted.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Radewagen for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Westerman and Ranking Member Grijalva, for holding this hearing. And thank you, Secretary Haaland, for your testimony. It's always good to see you, as always. I want to thank the Office of Insular Interior for the work they do on behalf of the territories. I appreciate the support and testimony Assistant Secretary Cantor and Deputy Assistant Secretary Nakoa gave on behalf of my bill, H.R. 6062, and our efforts towards self-determination and self-governance. I also appreciate that the FY25 budget proposal includes level funding for the American Samoa Operations Account. The stated goal of OIA's assistance to the territories is to offset the difficulties caused by our geographic and economic isolation and encourage our island's eventual self-sufficiency. On a related note, in an often overlooked bit of history, American Samoa's first cannery many decades ago was built with support from a DOI initiative to kickstart our economy. Now, StarKist is second only to the local government as an employer. Unfortunately, our fishing industry and our self-sufficiency is now under existential pressure from overzealous and short-sighted green politics. As part of President Biden's 30 by 30 initiative, the administration has a pending marine sanctuary proposal covering the area around the Pacific Remote Marine Island Monument. The monument was already doubled in size by the Obama administration, and with this expansion, 777,000 square miles of tuna fishing grounds, which supply our cannery, will be subject to multiple layers of environmental oversight. To put that in perspective, that is over 4 times the size of California. Our natural resources are already protected under the Magnuson-Stevenson Act, and adding another layer of bureaucracy adds no further protection. Expanding the monuments without allowing for commercial fishing will devastate American Samoa's economy. I'll be requesting report language directing no less than $3 million from the operations account be allocated to the American Samoa Community College. The territories do not want to be a charity case, and we will invest in education, and our island's future leaders and business owners will work to make every dollar count, and we need Interior to ensure the money is going to go where it needs to go. However, I assure you that if the fishing industry fails in American Samoa, the long-term cost to the federal government will increase exponentially. Instead of our little $28 million buffer account, the territory will instead require hundreds of millions in federal assistance as our island drops below even further the poverty line. So, Secretary Haaland, would you be able to get us an update on the status of the Marine Sanctuary proposal? Since NOAA has sponsored a workshop, they did it last September, we've not heard anything.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question. And I unfortunately, I can't give you a specific update now, but we would be more than happy to ensure that we reach out to your staff soon after this. And certainly if there's anyone in NOAA that you need to be in touch with, we'll try to make sure that you are in touch with them. But you're absolutely right. Indigenous voices are incredibly important here, and I appreciate you saying that, and we abide by that.
Considering DOI's obligations to the territories and the fact that nearly 80% of American Samoa's exports and port traffic revolve around the cannery, what is your contingency plan to cover the potential GDP loss if the cannery closes?
Again, I apologize. I can't answer that specifically, but absolutely we will take that back and make sure that we get you detailed information on that question.
So, Secretary Haaland, can I have your commitment to DOI and OIA's oversight authority of the territory? Will you ensure that federal funding going to the territories is being used for intended social programs and that territorial governments get the technical assistance they need to implement those programs and avoid waste?
We absolutely will follow the law, and we appreciate all of your support on the work that we did on the COFA.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I also have some questions for the record regarding the Marine Monument and its impact on the territories that I'm hoping you'll be able to bring back for an administration response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time, which is none.